Ambassador Kreleth Forantis had studied 17 sentient species during his 3 centuries of diplomatic service to the Galactic Concordance. He had witnessed the crystalline Vorathi sing their mathematical proofs into existence. He had observed the hive-mind consciousness of the Chitauri negotiate with 1 billion voices speaking as one. He had even survived the ceremonial dueling protocols of the Carthosi, where diplomatic failures were settled through ritual combat. Nothing in his considerable experience had prepared him for humanity. The first human ship had been detected 18 cycles ago, drifting through the outer reaches of Concordance space. A primitive vessel by galactic standards, chemical propulsion, crude electromagnetic sensors, and a population of frozen colonists suspended in what their species called cryogenic storage. The Concordance had observed them for 6 cycles before making contact, following standard first contact protocols established millennia before Kreleth's egg had been fertilized. That was the word the translation matrices had eventually settled upon, though Kreleth suspected it failed to capture the essential nature of human greeting behavior. When the Concordance vessel had established communication, the human captain, a female designated Commander Sarah Chen, had responded with what could only be described as aggressive friendliness. Her voice had risen in pitch. Her facial muscles had contorted into an expression his species had no equivalent for. She had spoken rapidly, interrupting herself multiple times, and had immediately begun making requests for cultural exchange, technological cooperation, and something called a welcome party. The Galactic Council had been intrigued. Most species, upon first contact with a galactic civilization, responded with fear, suspicion, or calculated caution. The Vorathi had spent 3 generations in mathematical contemplation before agreeing to communication. The Carthosi had attacked immediately, as was their way. The Chitauri had simply ignored external contact until their hive mind could process the implications across their networked consciousness. Humans, apparently, wanted to throw a party. Kreleth had been assigned to study them, to determine their threat level, their potential value to the Concordance, and their psychological profile for future diplomatic interactions. He had spent 12 cycles aboard the human vessel, which they called the Exodus Dawn, observing, interviewing, and attempting to understand this strange new species. His reports had caused considerable concern among the Council. "They are predators," Kreleth had written in his initial assessment. "This much is obvious from their biology. Forward-facing eyes for tracking prey, teeth designed for tearing flesh, a cardiovascular system optimized for pursuit hunting. But they have domesticated their predatory nature in ways no other species has achieved. They form pack bonds, they call them friendships, with members of other species. They keep other creatures as companions. They have evolved a complex social hierarchy that suppresses individual predation in favor of collective cooperation." The Council had accepted this analysis. Predator species were common in the galaxy, and most developed some form of social cooperation. What made humans unusual was the extent to which they had suppressed their nature. It was Kreleth's second report that had triggered the emergency session. "I have discovered an anomaly in human psychological architecture," he had written, "a mechanism that appears to exist in no other known species. The humans call it rage. It is distinct from the aggressive responses observed in other predator species. It is not a calculated threat display, nor a territorial instinct, nor a mating competition behavior. It is something else entirely, something dangerous." The Council had not understood. How could aggression be dangerous? Aggression was a known quantity, easily modeled, easily countered. The Carthosi were aggressive, and they had been integrated into the Concordance through careful application of superior firepower and negotiated submission. Kreleth had struggled to explain. Human rage was not aggression. It was not even anger, though anger was a component. It was a fundamental restructuring of human consciousness, a state in which the normal limitations of human physiology were suspended, where fear became irrelevant, where pain became fuel, where the only objective that mattered was the complete and total destruction of whatever had triggered the response. They become different beings, Kreleth had reported. I have witnessed minor instances of this transformation. A human crew member was injured in an equipment malfunction. Another crew member, one who shared a friendship bond with the injured party, experienced a partial rage response. His pupils dilated. His cardiovascular rate increased by 300%. His vocal output became incoherent. He attacked the malfunctioning equipment with his bare manipulator appendages, destroying it utterly, despite suffering significant damage to his own flesh in the process. The council had been dismissive. Self-destructive behavior was a known phenomenon in many species. It was typically a sign of psychological instability, easily exploited. Kreleth had disagreed. This was not instability. This was transformation. The human did not attack despite the pain. He attacked because the pain did not register. His consciousness had shifted to a state where self-preservation was simply absent. And when the transformation ended, when his rage subsided, he appeared confused by his own actions. He did not remember much of what he had done. He asked if his friend was all right, then apologized for the damage he had caused. That detail had finally captured the council's attention. A species that could suppress its self-preservation instinct at will, a species that could enter a state of consciousness where pain and fear became irrelevant. That was not aggression. That was something far more dangerous. The council had ordered additional study. Kreleth had complied. What he discovered over the following cycles would reshape galactic strategy for generations. Part 2. The Nature of the Beast. Humans, Kreleth learned, were not consciously aware of their own rage capacity. They spoke of it in euphemisms, losing your temper, seeing red, going berserk, but they did not truly understand what they were describing. They had constructed elaborate social mechanisms to suppress it, viewing it as shameful, primitive, something to be controlled rather than utilized. This was, Kreleth concluded, both fortunate and terrifying. Fortunate because it meant humans were not actively cultivating their rage capacity. They were not training themselves to enter the state at will, not developing techniques to maximize its effectiveness, not exploring its limits. They treated it as a character flaw rather than a biological weapon system. Terrifying because it meant the rage response was automatic, triggered by specific stimuli rather than conscious choice. And the triggers, Kreleth discovered, were remarkably consistent across the species. Threat to offspring. Threat to bonded companions. Perceived injustice. Betrayal of trust. And most concerningly, threat to the species as a whole. Kreleth had tested this last trigger carefully, using hypothetical scenarios presented as historical case studies. He had described in abstract terms situations where one species had attempted to exterminate another. The human responses had been illuminating. Commander Chen had listened to his historical account of the Varathi extermination campaigns with professional interest. She had asked questions about tactics, about population figures, about the duration of the conflict. Her responses had been analytical, detached, scholarly. Then Kreleth had mentioned that the targeted species had included children, infant members of the doomed civilization, killed alongside their parents. The change in Chen had been subtle but unmistakable. Her jaw muscles had tightened, her pupils had dilated slightly. Her hands had formed into fists, though she appeared unaware of the gesture.
"That's monstrous," she had said, her voice controlled but carrying an undercurrent that Kreleth's translation matrix struggled to process. "Please tell me the concordance stopped them."
Kreleth had assured her that the concordance had intervened, that the aggressor species had been brought to justice. He had not mentioned that justice in the concordance meant economic sanctions and diplomatic censure. He had not mentioned that the Varathi had continued their campaigns for 3 additional generations before internal political changes had ended the practice. He suspected Chen would not have approved of that timeline. The other humans he interviewed displayed similar patterns. They could discuss violence in abstract terms with remarkable detachment.
Their species had a long history of conflict, and they spoke of their own wars with a strange mixture of shame and fascination. But the introduction of specific triggers, children in danger, betrayal of trust, deliberate cruelty, produced consistent physiological responses.
They did not enter full rage states during these interviews. The triggers were too remote, too abstract. But Kreleth could see the potential, could trace the pathways that would lead from mild irritation to full transformation. He began to wonder what would happen if those triggers were activated directly. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. Part 3. The Incident. The attack on the Exodus Dawn came without warning. Kreleth was in his diplomatic quarters when the first impacts struck the hull. The ship shuddered, emergency lighting activated, and the human crew began moving with practiced efficiency toward their emergency stations. The attackers were Thornati, a species of parasitic nomads who existed on the fringes of concordant space, raiding ships for resources and captives. They were not members of the Concordance, and their activities were tolerated as an unfortunate but manageable threat. Most species simply paid tribute to avoid their attention. Humans, apparently, had not received this guidance. Kreleth watched the initial response from the bridge, where Commander Chen coordinated her crew with calm professionalism. The Thornati vessels outnumbered the Exodus Dawn 4-1, and their weapons technology was significantly more advanced. Chen's crew was fighting back, but the outcome was mathematically inevitable. "Ambassador," Chen said, her voice tight but controlled, "I'm ordering you to the escape pods. If they board us, you need to be gone." "If they board you," Kreleth replied, "I can negotiate. The Thornati respect Concordance diplomatic credentials. I can arrange." "They're not boarding for negotiation." Chen's eyes met his, and something in her expression made his thoracic membrane contract. "They're Thornati. We know what they do to captives." Kreleth knew as well. The Thornati were biological integrators. They absorbed genetic material from other species to enhance their own capabilities. The process was not gentle, and it was not quick. Captives could survive for cycles before the integration was complete. "I can still negotiate," Kreleth insisted. "Your crew is valuable. The Thornati would accept." "My crew is not for sale." The words were delivered without emotion, but Kreleth felt the weight behind them. This was not negotiation. This was declaration. The hull breach alarm sounded before he could respond. The Thornati boarding party came through the compromised airlock with the practiced efficiency of experienced raiders. They were bipedal insectoids, their exoskeletons reinforced with integrated armor, their limbs ending in cutting appendages designed for disabling prey. Kreleth had seen their work before. They were brutally effective against most species. Most species did not include humans. The first Thornati through the breach was met by a human crew member named Marcus Torres, a large male who served as the ship's primary medical officer. Kreleth had interviewed Torres extensively. He was a gentle being, devoted to healing rather than harming, uncomfortable with the ship's weapons protocols, and consistently advocating for peaceful resolutions to conflicts. The Thornati cut him across the chest before he could raise his weapon. Torres fell, blood spreading across his uniform, and for a moment the corridor was silent. Then someone screamed. Kreleth would later learn that the scream came from Torres's wife, another crew member named Diana, who had been positioned further down the corridor. She had witnessed her bonded mate fall, had seen the Thornati raise their cutting appendages for the killing blow, and something in her had simply broken. The scream was not human. It was a sound Kreleth had never heard before, raw, primal, stripped of all the civilized veneers that humans wore like second skins. It resonated through the corridor, and Kreleth felt his thoracic membrane seize in instinctive terror. Diana charged. She was not armed. She was not armored. She was a small female, perhaps half the mass of the Thornati warrior she was attacking. By every rational calculation, she should have died in seconds. She did not die. She collided with the Thornati at full speed, her hands finding the gaps in its exoskeleton, her teeth, those small, omnivore teeth that Krelith had dismissed as evolutionary vestige, sinking into the soft tissue beneath its mandibles. The Thornati shrieked, its cutting appendages slashing at her, opening wounds across her back and shoulders, but Diana did not fall. She did not feel the wounds. She was in the rage state, and pain had become irrelevant. The Thornati warrior fell, Diana's fingers having found and crushed something vital in its neural cluster. She rose from the body, covered in blood, hers and the Thornati's, and turned to face the remaining boarders. The sound she made was not a scream this time. It was lower, guttural, a promise of violence that transcended language barriers. The Thornati hesitated. Then Marcus Torres sat up. His wound was severe, a laceration across his torso that should have been fatal. But humans, Krelith remembered, had redundant organ systems. Their bodies were designed to survive catastrophic damage, to continue functioning long after other species would have succumbed. Torres looked down at his wound, looked up at his wife, and looked at the Thornati who had cut him. His eyes changed. Krelith had never believed the human phrase, seeing red. He had assumed it was metaphorical, a linguistic convention for describing anger. But as he watched Marcus Torres rise from his own blood pool, he understood that it was not metaphor. Something in Torres's consciousness had shifted, and what looked out of his eyes was not the gentle healer Krelith had interviewed. It was something older, something that predated human civilization, something that had been sleeping in human genetic memory since before they had learned to speak. It was the rage. The battle for the Exodus Dawn lasted 17 minutes by Concordance Standard Time measurement. Krelith spent most of those 17 minutes hiding in a maintenance compartment, his diplomatic training utterly useless in the face of what was occurring aboard the ship. He could hear the sounds, the screams, the impacts, the wet tearing noises that his translation matrix helpfully identified as tissue separation events, but he could not bring himself to observe directly. He had seen enough in that first corridor. He had seen Diana tear a Thornati warrior apart with her bare hands. He had seen Torres rise from what should have been a fatal wound and wade into the borders with a surgical laser that was never designed to be used as a weapon. He had seen the transformation spread through the human crew like a communicable disease, triggered by the sight of their wounded companions, by the threat to their ship, by some primal recognition that their tribe was under attack. The humans who had greeted him with enthusiastic friendship, who had thrown parties and offered cultural exchange, who had seemed so eager for peaceful contact, those humans were gone. In their place were beings of pure predatory violence, stripped of fear, stripped of self-preservation, stripped of everything except the drive to destroy the threat to their collective. When the sounds finally stopped, Krelith emerged from his hiding place. The corridor was unrecognizable. The walls were covered in Thornati ichor and human blood in roughly equal measure. Bodies lay in tangled heaps, far more Thornati than human, though the human casualties were significant. The survivors stood among the carnage, breathing heavily, their eyes slowly returning to normal as the rage state faded. Commander Chen found him 10 minutes later. She was wounded, multiple lacerations across her arms and torso, but she moved with purpose, checking on her crew, organizing medical response, resuming command as if the past 17 minutes had been a minor interruption rather than a catastrophic battle. "Ambassador," she said, her voice hoarse. "Are you injured?" "No." Krelith struggled to find words. "Commander, what I witnessed was regrettable." Chen's expression tightened. "We lost 12 crew members, good people. The Thornati took that from us." "The Thornati lost everyone." Chen paused, something flickering across her face that Krelith could not interpret. "Yes, they did. Their shits destroyed. When the boarding action failed, they tried to retreat. We pursued." "You pursued?"
Krelith repeated the words slowly, processing their implications. Commander, your vessel was damaged. Your crew was wounded. Rational tactical doctrine would suggest.
Rational tactical doctrine doesn't apply when someone attacks our people. Chen met his eyes, and for a moment Krelith saw the shadow of what she had been during the battle, the transformation lurking beneath her professional veneer. They came to our ship. They hurt our crew. They were going to take us apart for spare parts. That's not something we forget. That's not something we forgive. And that's definitely not something we let slide because retreating would be more tactically rational.
Krelith understood then. He understood in a way that all his studies and interviews had failed to convey. Human rage was not an individual phenomenon. It was collective. When one human was threatened, others responded. When the threat was severe enough, when it struck at core bonds, pack bonds, tribal bonds, species bonds, the rage spread. It cascaded through the group until everyone was transformed, until the entire collective became a single predatory organism focused on one objective.
Destruction of the threat. Not deterrence, not negotiation, not victory in any strategic sense. Destruction, complete and total.
The Thornati had attacked a sleeping predator. They had wounded its pack, and the predator had awakened, had risen in rage, and had not stopped until every single attacker was dead.
This was not how wars were fought in the galaxy.
This was something far more dangerous.
Part 5. The Report. Krelith's third report to the Concordance Council was classified at the highest level. Only the 7 senior counselors were permitted to access its contents, and even they were disturbed by what they read.
Human rage, Krelith wrote, is not a tactical capability. It is not a strategic asset. It is a fundamental transformation of human consciousness that eliminates all normal behavioral constraints in response to specific triggers. When activated, individual humans become killing machines of remarkable effectiveness, capable of ignoring pain, fear, and self-preservation instincts.
When the trigger is collective, when it affects multiple humans simultaneously, the transformation spreads, creating a synchronized predatory response that is nearly impossible to counter. The Council had questions, many questions.
How do we neutralize this capability? Asked Counselor Varath, the senior military strategist.
Krelith had considered this question at length. His answer was not reassuring.
Neutralization appears extremely difficult. The rage response is hardwired into human biology. It is not learned behavior that can be conditioned away, nor cultural practice that can be suppressed through social engineering. The only reliable method of preventing human rage appears to be avoiding the triggers entirely.
And the triggers are?
Threat to offspring, threat to bonded companions, perceived injustice, betrayal of trust, and threat to the species as a whole. The intensity of the response scales with the perceived severity of the threat and the strength of the relevant bonds. Counselor Varath absorbed this information. So if we were to engage in conflict with humans, we would need to avoid harming their young, their companions, and their species generally. We would need to avoid any perception of injustice or betrayal. This seems constraining.
It is impossible, Krelith replied. War, by definition, involves all of these elements. Any conflict with humans would trigger collective rage responses across their population, and once triggered, the rage does not end until the threat is eliminated.
Eliminated how?
Destroyed. Completely.
The Council fell silent.
You are saying, Counselor Methus said slowly, that humans cannot be defeated in conventional warfare, that any attack on their species would trigger a response that would not end until either they were extinct or their attackers were.
That is my assessment, yes.
That is absurd. No species has unlimited military capacity. Humans are still limited by resources, by population, by technology. They can be worn down, outproduced, outmaneuvered.
With respect, Counselor, I do not believe they can be. Krelith activated a display showing human historical records. I have studied their conflicts extensively.
Their species has been waging war against itself for their entire recorded history. They have developed tactics, strategies, and technologies specifically designed to trigger and utilize the rage response. They are more experienced with this form of warfare than any other species in the galaxy.
The display showed images that made several counselors look away. Human wars, human weapons, human capacity for violence against their own kind.
They survived all of this, Krelith continued. They survived conflicts that should have destroyed them. They survived because, when pushed to the edge, they become something else. Something that does not stop, does not surrender, does not accept defeat. Their history is filled with examples of humans who continued fighting after sustaining wounds that would kill any other species. Humans who charged superior forces with no weapons at all. Humans who sacrificed themselves to eliminate threats to their companions. This is not learned behavior. This is what they are. Then what do you recommend?
Krelith deactivated the display. I recommend we do not provoke them. Ever. Under any circumstances. I recommend we treat them with respect, honor our agreements with them, and never, under any circumstances, give them reason to believe we threaten their young, their companions, or their species.
You are suggesting we submit to them?
I am suggesting we avoid giving them reason to destroy us.
Part 6. The Integration.
The Concordance Council debated for 3 cycles before reaching a decision. Humanity would be offered full membership in the Galactic Concordance, not observer status, not probationary membership, not the gradual integration process that most new species underwent. Full membership, with all the rights, protections, and responsibilities that entailed. The decision was not born of generosity. It was born of fear.
If humans were inside the Concordance, they were bound by its laws and customs. Their rage response, while terrifying, could be channeled toward external threats rather than internal conflicts. And most importantly, the Concordance would be positioned as human allies rather than potential enemies. The Concordance had survived for millennia by avoiding existential threats. Human rage, properly understood, was exactly that, an existential threat unlike anything the galaxy had previously encountered. Better to embrace it than to trigger it. Krelith was assigned to deliver the invitation. He returned to the Exodus Dawn 6 cycles after the Thornati attack. The ship had been repaired, its crew had recovered, and the humans had resumed their original mission, establishing a colony on a world in the outer reaches of Concordance space. They had been remarkably resilient, mourning their dead while simultaneously preparing for their future.
Commander Chen received him in her quarters. She looked tired. The attack had taken something from her that had not fully regenerated, but she managed to smile when he entered.
Ambassador, I wasn't sure we'd see you again.
I was recovering. Krelith chose his words carefully. The events aboard your ship were outside my diplomatic experience.
Chen nodded. Her expression shifted to something more guarded. We're not proud of what happened. We lost control. People died who didn't have to.
You survived. Some of us.
Krelith studied her face, trying to read the emotions beneath her controlled exterior. Commander, I have been authorized to extend a formal invitation from the Galactic Concordance, full membership, immediate integration, all the benefits and protections that entails.
Chen's eyes widened slightly. Full membership? We've only just made contact. We don't even fully understand Concordance protocols yet.
The Council believes you are uniquely suited to membership.
Uniquely suited. Chen repeated the words slowly, and Krelith saw understanding dawn in her expression. This is about what we did to the Thornati, isn't it? About what you saw. There was no point in deception. Yes.
Chen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. You're afraid of us. I am. Respectful of what you are capable of. We're not monsters, Ambassador. What happened during the attack, that's not who we are. That's not how we want to be seen.
I understand. But what you are capable of, whether you wish to be seen that way or not,
is a factor the Council must consider.
Chen stood, moving to the viewport that looked out on the stars. Her reflection was ghostly against the darkness, her expression unreadable.
You know, she said quietly, where I come from, we have stories about this, about humans who go into battle and change. We called them berserkers, warriors who would work themselves into a rage state before combat, who would fight without armor, who would keep fighting after wounds that should have killed them. We thought they were legends, exaggerations.
They were not?
No. Chen turned to face him. They were us. All of us. We just forgot. We built civilization, suppressed our instincts, told ourselves we'd evolved beyond violence. But it's still there, Ambassador, under the surface, waiting.
This concerns you.
It terrifies me. Her voice cracked slightly. During the attack, when I saw Marcus fall, when I heard Diana scream, something happened to me. I stopped being Commander Chen. I stopped being a person. I became something else, something that just wanted to hurt the things that were hurting my people. And when it was over, when I came back to myself, I barely recognized what I'd done.
Krillith did not respond. He sensed she needed to speak more than she needed to hear.
12 of my crew are dead because of that attack, Chen continued. But over 40 Thornadi are dead because of what we did in response. Some of them were trying to retreat. Some of them had surrendered, and we killed them anyway because we couldn't stop. Because once it starts, the rage doesn't care about surrender. It doesn't care about ethics or rules of engagement or basic decency. It just destroys.
Your species has developed mechanisms to control this response.
We've developed mechanisms to suppress it, to pretend it doesn't exist. But we can't control it, Ambassador. Not really. That's what scares me most. Chen met his eyes. You're offering us membership in your concordance. You're afraid of what we might do if you don't. But have you considered what we might do as members?
Krillith had, in fact, considered this at length. His analysis had been included in his classified report.
The Council believes the benefits outweigh the risks. Your species' unique capabilities would be a significant asset against external threats, and as members of the Concordance, you would be bound by our laws and customs, which would provide a framework for controlling incidents.
Incidents. Chen laughed bitterly. Is that what you're calling what we did?
Commander, I have studied 17 sentient species. I have observed conflicts, negotiations, and diplomatic crises across centuries of service. In all that time, I have never encountered a species as terrifying as humanity. Not because of what you do, but because of what you could do.
Your rage response is a weapon unlike anything in the galaxy, a biological mechanism that transforms normal beings into killing machines, that spreads through collective bonds, that does not stop until the threat is eliminated. He paused, ensuring she understood his next words.
But that same mechanism, he continued, could be the salvation of the galaxy. The Concordance faces threats that diplomacy cannot resolve and conventional military force cannot counter. Your species could face those threats. Your rage could protect others rather than threaten them. That is what the Council hopes.
Chen stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she shook her head. You're not afraid of us, Ambassador. You're trying to recruit us. Both things can be true simultaneously.
Part 7. The New Strategy. Humanity's integration into the Galactic Concordance was completed within a single cycle, an unprecedented speed that reflected the Council's priorities. Human diplomats were trained in Concordance protocols. Human scientists were given access to galactic technology archives. Human military officers
and human soldiers were deployed.
The first major test came 3 cycles after integration. The Kethrani Dominion, a species the Concordance had been in cold conflict with for generations, launched a major offensive against the outer systems.
Their fleets overwhelmed the defensive installations, their ground forces occupied 3 colony worlds, and their demands were delivered with characteristic arrogance. The Concordance would cede 30 systems to Cathrani control. All non-Cathrani populations would be relocated. Any resistance would be met with escalating force. Standard Concordance doctrine called for negotiation, for measured response, for the gradual application of economic and diplomatic pressure until the Cathrani could be convinced to moderate their demands. The process typically took decades, during which occupied populations suffered under Cathrani rule. Humanity had a different approach. The human fleet arrived in Cathrani space 6 days after the offensive began. They did not negotiate. They did not issue demands. They simply attacked. The Cathrani were unprepared. Their military doctrine, like that of most galactic species, was based on rational cost-benefit analysis. When an attack became too costly, you withdrew. When defeat was inevitable, you surrendered. When the enemy demonstrated overwhelming force, you negotiated. Humans, apparently, did not operate under this doctrine. The first Cathrani fleet to engage the humans suffered 97% casualties before the survivors managed to retreat. The second fleet fared slightly better, only 89% losses, because they began retreating almost immediately. The third fleet did not engage at all, scattering before the human advance. Within 2 weeks, the humans had recaptured all 3 occupied colony worlds. Within a month, they had pushed into Cathrani core territory. Within 3 months, the Cathrani Dominion had ceased to exist as a political entity. Ambassador Krelith observed much of this campaign from a diplomatic vessel attached to the human fleet. What he witnessed confirmed his earlier assessments while raising new concerns. Human military operations were unlike anything in galactic experience. They did not fight to achieve strategic objectives. They did not fight to demonstrate capability or establish negotiating positions. They fought to destroy the enemy's capacity to threaten, and they did not stop until that capacity was eliminated. The rage response, Krelith learned, could be induced artificially. Human commanders showed their soldiers recordings of Cathrani atrocities against occupied populations, forced relocations, suppressed uprisings, civilian casualties. The soldiers watched these recordings, and something changed in their eyes. The same transformation Krelith had witnessed aboard the Exodus Dawn scaled up to entire military units. When those units engaged the Cathrani, they did not fight like rational beings. They fought like predators whose pack had been threatened. They took risks that no rational analysis would justify. They sustained casualties that should have broken their formations. They kept advancing, kept fighting, kept destroying until there was nothing left to destroy. The Cathrani surrendered unconditionally after a human fleet reached their homeworld. The peace terms were surprisingly generous. The humans did not demand reparations, did not require territorial concessions, did not impose punitive conditions. They simply required the Cathrani to release all prisoners, compensate the occupied populations, and sign non-aggression treaties with the Concordance. Why? Krelith asked Commander Chen, now Admiral Chen, promoted after the campaign. You had them at your mercy. You could have demanded anything. Chen looked tired. The campaign had been costly, and despite the victory, the weight of it showed on her face. Because the objective was to stop them threatening our people, she said, not to hurt them for the sake of hurting them. The rage drives us to eliminate the threat. Once the threat is eliminated, the rage ends. And when it ends, she paused, something haunted in her expression. When it ends, we have to live with what we did. You feel guilt? We feel everything. That's the problem, Ambassador. When we're in the rage state, we don't feel. We just act. But afterward, when we're ourselves again, all those feelings come back. Every death, every wound, every decision we made, it all catches up with us. She looked at him. We're not monsters. We're just broken. Evolution made us into the perfect killing machines, and then gave us the capacity to be horrified by what we are. Krelith considered this. Perhaps that is what makes you different from the species you fight. The Cathrani feel no guilt for their actions.
The Thornati feel no remorse for their raids. You feel both, despite being more effective at violence than either of them.
Maybe. Or maybe we're just better at hiding what we are from ourselves.
The Cathrani campaign established humanity's reputation in the galaxy. Within a decade, that reputation had transformed galactic politics entirely.
Part 8. The Protectors. The message spread through the galaxy with remarkable speed. Humanity was the Concordance's weapon of last resort. When diplomacy failed, when negotiations collapsed, when threats could not be resolved through rational means, the humans would be sent.
And once the humans were sent, the threat would be eliminated. Some species took this as a warning. The Thornati, after hearing what had happened to their raiding party aboard the Exodus Dawn, ceased all operations in Concordance space. The Carthosi, whose culture centered on martial honor, initially dismissed human capabilities, until a minor border dispute escalated into a demonstration that cost them 3 military fleets and 2 colony worlds. After that, the Carthosi became fervent advocates for peaceful resolution of conflicts. Other species took it as an opportunity. The weaker members of the Concordance, those who had long suffered under the predations of aggressive neighbors, began requesting human protection. Trade convoys that had once required extensive armament traveled unarmed, confident that any attack would bring human retaliation. Disputed territories that had been sources of constant conflict became peaceful because no one wanted to risk triggering human involvement.
The galaxy was becoming safer, though the mechanism of that safety was troubling to many observers. Ambassador Krelith, now the Concordance's senior human specialist, struggled to articulate his concerns to the Council.
We are becoming dependent on them, he argued. Our military doctrines are being replaced by human doctrines. Our diplomatic strategies assume human intervention as a final option. We are losing the capacity to resolve conflicts ourselves because we know the humans will resolve them for us.
Is this not efficient? Councillor Matthias asked.
The humans are more effective at military operations than any other species. Why should we expend resources duplicating their capabilities?
Because capabilities that are not exercised atrophy, and because dependence creates vulnerability. Vulnerability to what?
Krelith hesitated before answering. Vulnerability to the humans themselves.
The Council fell silent. It was the concern that no one wanted to voice, the possibility that lurked beneath all their calculations.
Humanity had integrated smoothly into the Concordance. They had followed the rules, honored their agreements, and deployed their capabilities only when requested. But they were also expanding, their population growing, their technology advancing, their influence spreading throughout galactic politics. Within a few generations, they would be the dominant species in the Concordance.
And if the Concordance ever gave them reason to feel threatened,
"We must ensure," Councillor Verith said slowly, "that they never have cause to turn against us."
"That is precisely my recommendation," Krelith replied. "But it requires more than simply avoiding provocation. It requires understanding what triggers their rage and ensuring those triggers are never activated."
you mentioned the triggers in your original report: threat to offspring, bonded companions, injustice, betrayal, threat to species.
Yes, but I have learned more in the years since that report. The triggers are not static. They expand. When humans bond with other species, those bonds become protected. When humans perceive injustice affecting non-humans, that can trigger responses as well. They are not simply protecting themselves. They are protecting everyone they consider pack.
Pack?
Their word. Or perhaps tribe would be more accurate. Humans are social predators. They form intense bonds with those they consider members of their group, and they will defend those members with the same rage they reserve for their own kind. The Concordance, in their minds, has become pack. Councillor Methis considered this. So they will protect us as they protect themselves?
Yes, but they will also respond to threats against us as threats against themselves. If another species attacks the concordance, humanity will respond, and their response will not be proportional.
That seems advantageous.
Until you consider what happens if humans perceive us as threatening our own members, if the concordance commits injustice against one of its species, if the Council betrays the trust of a member world, these would trigger the rage response, but the target would be us.
The Council absorbed this in silence.
We have integrated a species, Krelith continued, that cannot be controlled, cannot be contained, and cannot be defeated. We have placed our security in their hands, and we have given them reason to view us as family. This is either the wisest decision in Concordance history or the most catastrophic. And the only way to ensure the former is to ensure we never, under any circumstances, give them reason to view us as enemies.
What specifically do you recommend?
Krelith had prepared for this question. His recommendations would reshape Concordance policy for generations.
First, we must eliminate all forms of institutionalized injustice within the Concordance. Humans have a visceral response to perceived unfairness. It is one of their core triggers. Any species that suffers discrimination, exploitation, or mistreatment under Concordance rule is a potential catalyst for human rage. We must ensure that every member of the Concordance is treated fairly, not because it is ethical, though it is, but because the alternative is unthinkable.
Second, we must never threaten human children, families, or communities. This seems obvious, but the implications extend beyond direct threats. If human colonies are neglected, if human populations are disadvantaged, if human youth are exploited, these can all be perceived as threats. We must ensure human interests are protected, even when doing so requires sacrifice from other species.
Third, we must maintain absolute transparency in our dealings with humanity. Betrayal of trust is a trigger, and humans have long memories. If we deceive them, manipulate them, or conceal important information from them, we risk triggering a response that will not end until we are destroyed.
And fourth, we must never give them reason to believe we threaten humanity as a species. This is the most dangerous trigger, the one that would activate collective rage across their entire population. If humans ever perceive the Concordance as an existential threat, they will respond with everything they have. And everything they have, as the Kethrani learned, is considerable.
Councillor Verath nodded slowly. You are saying we must treat humanity as
partners, as equals, as family. Krelith met the Councillor's eyes. We invited them in because we feared what they might do as enemies. Now we must ensure they never become enemies, because the consequences would be catastrophic.
And if we do all this, if we follow your recommendations perfectly?
Krelith allowed himself a rare expression of optimism. Then we will have the most powerful protectors in the galaxy, beings who will defend us with the same ferocity they defend their own children. The rage that makes them terrifying can also make them magnificent, if we give them reason to care about us.
The Council approved his recommendations unanimously. Part 9. Generations. 300 years passed. The galaxy was transformed beyond recognition. The Galactic Concordance, once a loose confederation of species managing their conflicts through diplomacy and economic pressure, had become a genuine community. Injustice had been reduced, not eliminated, but reduced to levels that previous generations would have considered impossible. Exploitation had been curtailed, wars had become rare, and when they occurred, they ended quickly. All because of human rage. Ambassador Krelith, now Elder Krelith, a title granted for his centuries of service, observed the changes with satisfaction and concern. The Concordance had prospered under human protection, but it had also changed. Species that had once valued martial tradition had abandoned it. Species that had once maintained independent militaries had integrated them into Concordance commands. The diversity that had once characterized galactic civilization was slowly homogenizing around human values. This was not entirely negative.
Human values included concepts like justice, fairness, and protection of the vulnerable, concepts that made the galaxy a better place. But it was also concerning because it represented a fundamental shift in galactic power dynamics. Humanity was not simply the dominant species in the Concordance. They were becoming the template for galactic civilization. Elder Krelith discussed this with his human counterpart, Ambassador Sarah Chen IV, a distant descendant of the Commander Chen he had first met aboard the Exodus Dawn.
Your ancestor was concerned about human rage, Krelith observed. She viewed it as a flaw, something to be ashamed of.
Many still do, Chen IV acknowledged. We're not entirely comfortable with what we are, but we've learned to live with it. Have you? Krelith studied her face, so similar to her ancestors, yet marked by generations of cultural change. Your species has changed considerably since first contact. The rage response is less prominent than it once was.
It's still there. We've just gotten better at not triggering it. Chen IV smiled slightly. Turns out, when you're not constantly threatened, you don't need to tap into the berserker. We have security now, security we've never had in our history. No one's attacking our colonies. No one's threatening our children. We can afford to be calm.
And if that security were threatened?
The smile faded. Then we'd remember what we are.
Krelith nodded slowly. This was what he had hoped to hear, confirmation that human nature had not fundamentally changed, that the rage response remained a deterrent against existential threats. But it was also what concerned him. The Concordance has become dependent on your protection, he said. Our own martial capabilities have atrophied. If humanity were to withdraw that protection.
We won't. But if you did.
We won't. Chen IV's voice carried an edge that reminded Krelith of her ancestor. The Concordance is family now. Your species, all the species. Their pack. We don't abandon pack. Even if the cost of protecting them became prohibitive, even if other opportunities presented themselves.
Chen IV met his eyes, and for a moment Krelith saw something ancient looking out at him, the same thing he had seen in Marcus Torres's eyes 3 centuries ago, as the human rose from his own blood to defend his companions.
You still don't understand, do you? She said quietly. You think the rage is about fighting, about violence. It's not. The rage is about protection. It's about defending the ones we love, no matter the cost. And we love you now, Elder Krelith. All of you. The Concordance is ours to protect, and we will protect it until the last human draws their last breath.
It should be. And it should also be terrifying, Chen IV leaned forward, because the flip side of that love is the rage. If anyone threatens what we love, if anyone threatens the Concordance, they will face the full weight of human fury. And as your ancestors learned, there is nothing in this galaxy more destructive than humans who have been given a reason to be angry. Krelith considered this for a long moment. 3 centuries of diplomacy, of studying human nature, of trying to understand the species that had transformed galactic politics, and still they surprised him. You love us, he said slowly. That is why you protect us.
Yes. And you would destroy anyone who threatened us. Without hesitation.
That is a heavy burden to bear.
Chen IV smiled again, but there was sadness in it now. You have no idea. We carry the capacity for terrible violence, and we carry the capacity for deep love, and both of them drive us to protect the ones we care about. It's not comfortable, it's not easy, but it's who we are.
She stood, moving to the viewport that looked out on the stars, the same gesture her ancestor had made 3 centuries ago.
My great-great-grandmother was afraid of what we are, Chen IV continued. She thought the rage was a flaw, something to be ashamed of, but I think she was wrong. The rage is a gift, a terrible, dangerous gift, but a gift nonetheless. It means we care enough to fight. It means we love enough to kill. And in a galaxy full of threats, that capacity is what keeps the ones we love safe.
She turned back to Krelith. So don't worry, Elder. We're not going anywhere. The Concordance is our pack, our tribe, our family. And we will defend our family until the stars burn out.
Part 10. The Eternal Guardians.
1,000 years after first contact, humanity had spread throughout the galaxy. Their colonies numbered in the millions, their population in the trillions, their influence in every sector of concordant space and beyond. They had become the backbone of galactic civilization, not through conquest, but through protection.
Other species had risen and fallen. Empires had been built and destroyed. Technologies had advanced and been superseded. But through all the changes, one constant remained: humanity's rage and humanity's love. The Concordance had evolved as well. It was no longer a loose confederation, but a genuine federation, with humanity as its core. Other species had integrated so deeply into human culture that the boundaries between them had begun to blur. Interspecies families had become common. Hybrid communities had flourished. The distinction between human and non-human had become, in many ways, irrelevant.
Because the rage no longer recognized it. When humans defended their pack, they defended everyone in that pack, regardless of species, regardless of origin, regardless of any factor except the simple truth that they were family. And as humanity's definition of family had expanded, so had their capacity for protection. Elder Krelith did not live to see this future. His species' lifespan, though considerable, was not unlimited. But his descendants, the diplomatic corps he had trained, the species he had guided, carried his legacy forward. And they remembered his lessons. Never threaten humanity's children. Never betray humanity's trust. Never give humanity reason to believe you threaten their species.
These rules had become the foundation of galactic politics, the unwritten laws that governed all interaction with humanity. They were not laws because humans demanded them. They were laws because the alternative was unthinkable.
And in the rare cases when those laws were broken, when some species, some faction, some foolish individual decided that humanity's protection could be tested, the consequences served as a reminder to the rest of the galaxy. Humanity remembered. Humanity raged. Humanity destroyed. And then humanity returned to the business of protecting the ones they loved. This was the truth that the galaxy had learned, the truth that had transformed everything. Humanity was not the most advanced species, not the most intelligent, not the most sophisticated, but they were the most protective, the most fierce, the most determined to defend what they considered their own. And they had made the galaxy their own. The other species could have resented this. Some did in the early centuries, species that remembered a time before human dominance, who chafed under the shadow of human protection. But those resentments faded as the generations passed, as the benefits of human guardianship became undeniable. Wars ended. Predation ceased. The strong no longer exploited the weak, because the strong knew that the weak were under human protection, and no one wanted to face human rage. It was not a perfect galaxy. Injustice still occurred. Conflict still erupted. The long work of building a better civilization was never complete. But it was a safer galaxy, a kinder galaxy, a galaxy where the smallest species could thrive without fear of extinction. Because humanity was watching. And if anyone threatened the galaxy that humanity had claimed as family, well, the galaxy had learned what happened then. Epilogue: The Warning. 10,000 years after first contact, a new species entered the galaxy. They came from beyond the explored regions, their technology advanced, their intentions unclear. They sent envoys to concordant space, seeking to establish relations, seeking to understand this strange civilization they had discovered. The concordants welcomed them cautiously. New species were rare now. The galaxy had been thoroughly explored, thoroughly mapped, thoroughly integrated into the federation that humanity had built.
A genuinely alien civilization was an exciting prospect, a chance for new perspectives, new technologies, new relationships.
But first, the newcomers had to understand certain truths. Ambassador Lin Chen Vor, a hybrid 7/8 human, 1/8 Voranthe, and thoroughly representative of the modern concordance, delivered the traditional first contact briefing.
There are some things you need to understand about this galaxy, she said. About the species you'll encounter, the politics you'll navigate, the relationships you'll form.
The alien envoy, a crystalline being of a type never before encountered, listened with what Lin interpreted as polite attention.
Most importantly, Lin continued, you need to understand about humans.
We have observed your species, the envoy replied. You appear to be the dominant form of governance in this region. Your technology is sophisticated, your territory extensive. We are interested in establishing trade relations.
That's good. Trade relations are valuable, but you need to understand something about humanity that isn't obvious from observation. And that is? Lin considered how to explain. In 10,000 years, the story had been told countless times, but it never became easier. Humans have a capacity, she said carefully, for transformation. Under certain conditions, when our children are threatened, when our families are endangered, when we perceive injustice or betrayal or existential threat, we become different beings. Our consciousness shifts, our limitations fade, and we become capable of things that other species find difficult to believe. The envoy's crystalline form flickered with patterns that Lin's translator interpreted as curiosity. You are describing a berserker state. We have observed similar phenomena in other aggressive species. Similar, not identical. Lin leaned forward. Other species enter rage states and fight until they're killed or exhausted. Humans enter rage states and fight until the threat is eliminated. Not deterred, not negotiated. Eliminated. Completely.
This seems like a dangerous liability. A species that cannot control its aggressive impulses.
We can control them. Usually, when we're not threatened. But when we are threatened, Lin paused, searching for words. Let me tell you what happened the first time someone attacked a human vessel in concordance space. 10,000 years ago, before your species entered the galaxy.
She told the story of the Exodus dawn, of Diana and Marcus, of the 17 minutes that had ended with every Thornati attacker dead.
She told the story of the Kethrani campaign, of fleets destroyed, of worlds conquered, of a civilization ended, not because humans wanted revenge, but because humans could not stop until the threat was gone. She told the story of 1,000 similar incidents across the millennia, species that had tested human resolve and learned what human rage meant, factions that had threatened human communities and been erased from existence, empires that had risen against the concordance and been reduced to historical footnotes.
The envoy listened to all of this with increasing agitation. By the time Lin finished, its crystalline form was pulsing with colors her translator could not interpret.
This is concerning, it said finally. Your species possesses an uncontrollable capacity for violence that eliminates any threat, regardless of cost. How do you coexist with such beings?
Lin smiled. It was a human expression, one she had inherited from ancestors who had learned to show their teeth as a sign of friendship rather than threat.
We coexist by being family, she said. Humans protect the ones they love. They rage against the ones who threaten their loved ones. And over the millennia, they have come to love the entire galaxy.
The entire galaxy?
Every species in the concordance, every world, every community, every individual under concordance protection. We're all pack now, all family, and humanity protects its family.
The envoy processed this for a long moment. So the violence you describe, the destruction of species that threaten you, this is done in defense of others?
In defense of us, all of us, Lin gestured broadly. This is what you need to understand. The galaxy you're entering is protected by humans who will rage against anything that threatens it. If you come in peace, if you respect the rules, if you treat the species of the Concordance fairly, you have nothing to fear. You'll be welcomed. You'll be embraced. Eventually, you'll be loved.
And if we do not come in peace? Lin's smile faded. For just a moment, the envoy caught a glimpse of something ancient in her eyes, something that had been passed down through 10,000 years of human heritage, something that lurked beneath the civilized surface of every human in the galaxy.
Then you'll learn what the Thornati learned, what the Cathrani learned, what every species that has threatened our family has learned. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped.
You do not want to make humanity angry. There is nothing in this universe more dangerous than humans who have been given a reason to rage. We have had 10,000 years to refine our capacity for violence, 10,000 years to develop technologies that amplify our natural aggression, 10,000 years to spread throughout the galaxy and embed ourselves in every strategic position.
If you threaten our family, any part of it, any species, any world, you will face the combined rage of trillions of humans across millions of worlds. And we will not stop until you are gone. Not defeated, not surrendered. Gone.
The envoy's crystalline form had gone completely still.
This is your warning, Lin concluded. The only warning you will receive. The galaxy is protected. We are the protectors. And we do not forgive those who threaten what we love.
She stood, straightening her uniform. Welcome to the Concordance. I hope we can be friends.
The envoy departed shortly afterward. When it returned to its people, it carried a message, a warning that would be passed down through generations of the newcomer species, that would shape their approach to galactic politics for millennia to come.
Never threaten humanity. Never threaten what humanity loves.
Never give the humans a reason to rage.
It was the lesson the galaxy had learned 10,000 years ago. It was the lesson that had transformed galactic strategy forever, and it would remain the lesson as long as humans drew breath. Because human rage was not a weakness. It was not a flaw. It was not something to be cured or controlled or suppressed. It was a promise. A promise that humanity would protect the ones they loved, no matter the cost. A promise that threats would be answered with absolute destruction. A promise that the galaxy would be safe because humanity had made it their family. And humans defended their family to the last. Forever. The end.